Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 13. I think in the last chapter, was it chapter 12 or chapter 11, where I mispronounced Antipater. What did I say? Antipater? Got some heat over that. But you know what? How do you know? Because nobody was there. Even the tweed coats don't know. You know, the guys with the bow ties and the pipes and curved pipes and the English accents. The professors at Oxford who are linguistics, the guys that know what they're talking about. So, because there were no cell phones, no cameras, no YouTube. Wouldn't that have been cool to know what Jesus, to have a video of Jesus, to know what he looked like, to know what he sounded like? He doesn't pop up in the novel until probably the last third of it. He did make an appearance briefly as a child in chapter 9. I don't describe him, by the way, because that would only weaken the character, because you already have an image in your mind of who Jesus is and what he sounded like, and to describe him would only weaken that image. That's why Ben-Hur was so powerful, that scene where you don't see him from the front, where you just see him from the back, and he's bending over giving water to the slaves and to Ben-Hur. Whoa, I was 7 years old when I saw that with my grandfather. Made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I think Ben-Hur was the only movie that was better than the book. I won't give you any spoilers, but I will say this, that the ending of Before They Awaken is really cool. It's got a very unusual twist to it. Okay, so where did we leave off? I think with the pounding on the doors. The pounding continued. There was a clattering of metal and the hurried exchange of heavy male voices from beyond the carved timbers of the barrier that kept them safe. They're Romans, I think, whispered Rachel. Mahler stood motionless. Yeah, maybe, he said. Crimson was sweeping up from his neck into his face. Blood vessels began to bulge on his forehead. It was what always happened when he was angry or frightened or when he felt threatened. Rachel loved to tease him about it. It was how she got him to capitulate whenever they would argue, by mocking him until he finally started laughing. But here it gave her comfort. Here she accepted his protectiveness as he moved instinctively in front of her, muscles tensed. She could see it through his tunic. Though he was gentle on the inside, Mahler was powerfully built, and his face could look threatening to anybody who didn't know him, as if it had been hacked out beneath jutting cheekbones, the way a statue might look before being smoothed out and refined. And it made her feel a little bit safer. Shammah was making hand gestures for them to open the door. Shammah was Eli's mute servant, an aging Samaritan with the wisdom of Solomon, so said Eli. It was Rachel who spoke first. Shammah's right. We should open the door. The Romans are not our enemies. They are here in added numbers on orders from Caesar to act as our protectors from the marauders. Maybe they have information on Father. The doors, thick and reinforced with iron strips, were obscuring understanding of the shouts beyond it, and the surf and the wind were further clouding understanding of the words. All right, said Mahler. All right, let's do it. And together, with Rachel and Shammah, he unbolted and drew open the weighty doors. They were double doors, the height of 3 men, and they opened inward from the middle. Standing there were soldiers indeed. There were 2 of them, but their helmets and the gear were mismatched and ill-fitting, and when one of them spoke, his voice lacked the accent common to Romans. "Is this a home of the merchant Eli?" one of them queried. He had a scar that parted his lips in such a way as to give dominant authority to every word spoken. Mahler recognized him instantly. They had been tricked. They had been tricked into opening the doors for the soldiers of Athronges. "You are correct," said Mahler. "This is the home of the merchant Eli. But he is not here. He's away on business concerning the Sanhedrin." The reply was immediate. "You are partially correct," the one with the scar said, amused by what he was about to say. "He is certainly away on business, but it's not the business that concerns the Sanhedrin. It's a business that concerns the Shepperd Messiah." "What are they talking about?" asked Rachel. "What have you done with him?" demanded Mahler. "Father, are you speaking about Father?" Rachel breathed out the question with hope and confusion all at the same time. "Do you know where Father is?" The Lord of Throngus is not an unreasonable man, said the man with the scar in tones dripping with sarcasm, directed at Mahler. We have instructions to tell you where your wife's father is once we have within our possession the crown of King David, which we all know you have, and funds for the cause, which we also know you have. 50,000 sesterces is the sum the Messiah asks. The other soldier quickly added, but we must hurry. His voice was helpful in its tone rather than that of delivering an ultimatum. It made it seem as if he were a reluctant participant in the affair. He's been set within a watery place. It may already be too late, the helpful one said. I'm instructed to give you this, and he handed Mahler a piece of parchment, whereupon was written a ransom note, a ransom demand in 2 languages, Aramaic and Latin. Mahler read it aloud, his voice lowering to a near whisper at the end. If you want to see the master of your household again, you will follow these directions without compromise. You are instructed to bring an amount of 50,000 sesterces to the base of the aqueduct on the shoreline as a contribution to the Messiah's cause of liberating the people of Israel. And there you shall also surrender the crown of King David. Rachel shook her head in confusion. The crown of King David? Mahler, you told me you didn't have it. What's going on? What are we going to do? Well, we'll give him the crown. What? Mahler explained in an undertone of near silence, as though his thoughts alone were good enough to answer the question. The mythical crown of King David. It's not a myth. I have it. Mahler? In a guttural and barely audible whisper, Mahler answered her. I do. I've got it. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Because I don't want you involved, because a very dangerous man wants it. I thought you said he was the Messiah. That's the very reason he's a dangerous man. Rachel, think about it. This is the man anointed by God. Mahler's tones were unnatural and loud enough to be overheard, as if he was an actor in a play, as if he wanted to be overheard. If he truly is the Messiah, this is a man who has been singled out by the very hand of God. A man with that kind of power is indeed a dangerous man, especially when you cross him, which I do not intend to do. A man like that doesn't forgive and forget, and he has odds against me. I stole the crown, and I ran like a coward while the other Jews died, horrible deaths. Well, if he has that kind of power, what does he need the crown for? Mahler was stumbling over his thoughts, because half of what he said was true. He did believe in the power of the Messiah. Obviously, Mahler did not have the crown, but he needed them to believe it. He needed them to believe he did. He was thinking of how he would answer the question when the one with the scar answered for him. He had indeed overheard. With the crown of King David, the Messiah's power will have no limits, power even to crush Rome. True, he has power now, but with the crown, he'll have ultimate power with the same ease. He can plunder Rome with the same ease that David slew Goliath, power even to raise the departed souls of the righteous. It is enwrapped by the Shekinah fire itself. Now, where is it? It's here, hidden, well hidden. We'll go get it then, along with the money. How do we know you really have my father? Asked Rachel. The reluctant one laid his bag on a nearby table and pulled out a ring, handling it like it was a precious stone that might slip away and be lost forever. Rachel snatched it up. It's father's. It is. What have you done with him? The reluctant one looked into Mahler's and Rachel's face. There is not much time. Your master has been bound hand and foot and has been set within a cluster of rocks in a place that will soon fill with water at the rising tide. We are instructed to deliver this message to you and to lead you to a place on the beach by the hippodrome where another of Athrongus's freedom fighters will meet us and exchange the funds and the crown for exact instructions on where to find your master. But it must be 50,000 sesterces. He looked at Mahler. This was a soldier older and wiser, spoke the lines in his face and the tone of his voice, wiser in the ways of life's experiences, caught between 2 worlds, his own that something good inside was forging, and the one on the outside that mankind had created. My lord, you must do exactly as he says. I am bound by my promise to tell you that it must be exactly 50,000 sesterces, and you must also deliver the crown. I am also bound by my promise to remind you that you have chosen the wrong side. and that it is never too late, and that he will forgive and forget. The one with the scar quickly finished the thought, for once he has the crown, he will plunder Rome. Under the almighty banner of Yahweh, the God of the Jews, he will gather his followers and dispose of every last living thing that is Roman, finally, wives, children, even oxen and sheep. He was speaking as though he had been given the words and had committed them to memory, as well as those sympathetic to the Roman ways, just as Joshua did to the non-believers of Canaan. For here is the long-awaited Messiah, come at last to us to slay a great beast, an evil empire. It is so written as in the prophecies. He began to chat in Aramaic. Eloha Akbar, Eloha Akbar. God is great, God is great. The reluctant one joined in, eyes glazed over. Eloha Akbar. Mahler knew then that nothing more could be done, except to produce the crown. Both were prepared to die for their cause, clearly, and their God. 50,000, Mahler whispered to his wife. Do we have that much? He didn't know why he was whispering. The soldiers could still hear. I don't even know where your father keeps his money. I do, she said, steady and sure. I think I can get it together. It'll take me a while. She said it while turning to walk away and was quickly stopped by the one with the scar. Not without us, she said. We will come with you. That was what Mahler was hoping for. It gave him opportunity to find something to approximate the weight of a crown of solid gold. While Rachel led them in one direction, he went in another, to Rachel's bedchamber, where he emptied her jewelry box and placed a brick inside. The box was perfect. It had carvings of Moses and the pillar of fire, the Shekinah fire, the very power purported to enwrap the crown. It was a perfect receptacle. They would not look inside either because their superstitions would not allow it. They were well familiar with the story of Uzzah, who touched the Ark of the Covenant, possessed also of the Shekinah fire, the same power. And it was perfect. They remember the story of Uzzah, who touched the Ark of the Covenant and fell dead upon the spot. The money in the box were placed in a satchel. Mahler was forced to carry it. It must have weighed as much as a full-grown goat. He was barely able to carry it, its weight at times causing him to collapse under it. At one point, striking the ground so hard it caused his mouth to bleed as they made their way to the secret rendezvous point on the shoreline, where it was promised the Shepperd Messiah himself would be there to complete the exchange, and probably also take Mahler into custody. No one escapes justice, not anymore, now that the Shepperd Messiah rides. Strange, though, is the way the mind works, now facing the possibility of actually losing his father-in-law. The arguments with Eli, the philosophical and religious differences that seemed to form a chasm, were of little importance. All that mattered now was getting him back safely. Even Eli's gentle dog knew something was amiss. Jesus of Sai was prancing back and forth, a golden Canaanite, with a tuft of white on his curled-up tail. Mahler patted him on the head to calm him, as he had been doing during the ordeal, lest the animal attack, in which case all would be lost. Mahler remembered the first time he saw the bothersome beast. It had been right after he and Rachel had moved into after they were married, when they first moved into their portion of Eli's mansion. Mahler had gone outside to assist Shammah and Eli after they had returned from a buying trip. The dog bounded out from seeming nowhere. Eli reached in his pouch. The dog halted, ears perched forward, tail arched above its back. Eli held out his hand. A morsel of dried beef was in his palm. The dog barked and half lurched. Eli stopped him. Tell me first, is Jesus a good boy? The dog tilted his head inquisitively. Tell me, is Jesus a good boy? The dog finally conceded to the demand, curled back his lips and bared his teeth, but breaking the snarl a time or two with an impatient yap, causing Eli to withdraw the offering. To withdraw the offering is the proper way to say it. Now, is Jesus a good boy? The dog resolved to obey, and set firm his stance and hardened his eyes, and gave a most fearsome growl. That's it, that's a good boy, whereupon Eli delivered the morsel. Jesus gulped it down, and, duty done, returned to his imposing, smiling, yapping self, his body shaking with delight as Eli and Rachel stroked his head and shoulders. Mahler whispered his disapproval to Rachel. Your dog is named after the high priest? It's father's private protest, Rachel explained. He doesn't have much use for the temple priesthood. You knew that. Mahler was taken aback and began to wonder if his father had made a good decision in promising him in marriage to this woman, to this family, where blasphemy abounded. But he loved his wife, and he loved Eli, and he loved life. Every single day brought newer and deeper meaning to his existence and to the relationships with which God had chosen to bless him. He could not let Eli die. He would not. Mahler was right. Superstition did forestall verification of what was actually within the box. The two soldiers led them to a place on the beach within full view of all parts of the half-moon bay of Caesarea, never once looking inside the box. Mahler was confused, though. It was where the aqueduct came down from the hills. It was a public setting with people coming and going in full view of one another. There would be no place to hide a kidnapped victim. Where could Eli possibly be? As if in answer to his confusion, the reluctant one, unseen by his more warlike comrade, gave a furtive wave of his head toward the aqueduct, its geodynamic archways and smoothed-out bricks crawling down to the beach from Mount Caramel in the spring of Shumai, 10 miles away, delivering atop its smooth elegance a ribbon of cold and pure mountain water. Something was in there, some kind of blockage. Bits of water were spilling over the side. At the direction of the one with the scar, Mahler threw down the satchel. Open it, he demanded. Mahler hesitated, then went to the satchel and untied the rope and drew it open and stood back, feigning fear. You know what I mean. You know what I'm talking about. The crown, the box that is inside the satchel. Pick it up and open it. Let us see the crown. Mahler took another step back. What, did you think we would not check? I don't know if the crown is in there or not, said Mahler. I did not look. Why not? You know very well the reason why, Mahler told him. For the same reason you have not opened it yourself. It possesses the Shekinah fire, the most powerful energy under the sun. It is the very breath of God. That is why. Open it, he repeated. I did my job. I took the box from its pedestal in the temple's inner place. It's up to you to verify its contents. Open it. Mahler picked up the box, and with an almost imperceptible nod at Rachel, he said, Turn your eyes away, everyone, lest the fire blind us all. The nod, though, had been a signal to Rachel. It had been a signal that he was about to make his move. The one with the scar thought he saw something shining from within the box as the lid was being ever so slowly drawn back. A light, he shouted out in fear, and he too turned his eyes away. His imagination, obviously, because nothing was in there but the brick. But all were able to see Mahler's knees quiver and give way, and blood come gushing out of his mouth. All were witnesses as he screamed out words in Hebrew and fell unconscious into the sand. Rachel and Shammah knew and understood the tongue of the Lord. The others did not. So when Mahler had screamed, it had been a scream in Hebrew, a scream of instructions to Mahler and to Rachel and Shammah, directions on where to find Eli. Here's the way it sounded. Here's the way the Hebrew words sounded, but heard by Rachel and Shammah. Your father is in the aqueduct. Run to him there. And they did exactly that. They ran to Eli's rescue, while the captors in their superstition were staring in horror at Mahler's prone body and deciding whether or not they should risk picking up the thing responsible for it. When Mahler had fallen earlier, he had bitten his tongue. That was all there was to it. The tongue is a sensitive organ. It bleeds profusely, even with a minor injury. And that's all it had been, just a minor injury. But he had allowed the blood to accumulate in his mouth for when the time was right, for when he would pretend to open the box, for when he would pretend to be struck dead by the Shekinah fire, for when he would use their superstitions to his advantage. And it worked. The coins had spilled out upon the sand, and the captors were gathering them up rather than looking at Mahler. They would deal with the box later. For now, they just put it back in the satchel unopened. They failed to notice that Mahler, too, had gotten up and run to the aqueduct. The three of them, Mahler, Rachel, and Shammah, were scaling its walls like soldiers in battle. finding hand and footholds between the basket-sized blocks of stone at the place where the water was spilling over the side, all without being yet noticed. Eli had been gagged and bound hand and foot and was struggling to keep his head above the icy water. He was shivering with convulsive force, nearly unconscious from the cold itself. It was approaching the time of the Feast of Sukkot, an annual commemoration of the 40 years the Jews had wandered in the desert, a time when more flow would soon be released through the channel. That had been what the reluctant one had meant by the term rising tide. Eli would have drowned in minutes. When his gag was removed, shivering and near death though he was, the first thing Eli did was to look at each of his rescuers and thank them with a touch on the cheek from a trembling and grateful hand. "Oh, my daughter, my prized and precious pearl, my only heir, my legacy, thank you. Ah, and good Shammah, what would I do without my good and most excellent Samaritan servant and my son-in-law? Blessed be the day that you became yoked to our family." The three of them, Rachel, Shammah, and Mahler, half carrying Eli, were hurrying in an effort to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the soldiers, but escape was not possible. They realized when horses came lumbering out of the forest, well able to overtake them. It was a single rider leading 3 empty horses, his ribbon of red trailing behind him, an obvious accomplice. The rider shouted for them to stop, and Mahler signaled compliance to Rachel and Eli. They had no choice. The forest rim was simply too far, and Eli too weak. Even if they could get to the forest, they were well within bowshot range. They'd never make it. So Mahler and his wife and father-in-law, though they were so close to freedom, they simply stood and waited for the captors to once again surround them. They didn't have any other choice. "Is that where the crown is inside?" the rider shouted at the one with the scar, hovering over him, pointing to the satchel, which he now carried. "Open it!" The one with the scar dropped it, but did nothing more. His terror was etched into his face. The rider shouted again for him to open it. With trembling fingers, he picked up the satchel and drew open the cords. "You know what I'm talking about," clarified the rider. "The crown. I want to see the crown, and it better be there, or Eli the Sadducee dies, and you shall die right along with him." "It's in the box," said Mahler calmly, amused that this grizzled warrior was afraid of a brick, though he didn't yet know it was only a brick. Mahler was also amused at his own cleverness because of the plan that he had come up with. The one with the scar reached in the satchel and took hold of the box, but dropped it and cried out in fear, warning of the fire. It was the reluctant one who finally took the box and opened it, and as he was unlatching the lid, he promptly fell over dead, gripping his chest in the process as though trying to tear out his heart, letting the box fall to the ground only half opened. There was a strange look frozen into his face. He seemed to have been asking a question in his last moments of life. Is there a purpose to it all, a journey, a road upon which we are traveling, destination unknown? And he left the confines of his body in almost the same instant to find the answer elsewhere. Never fully opened, the box lay on the ground for quite some time until the one with the scar, his misshapen lip trembling, was ordered by the rider to pick it up, latch it, and put it back in the satchel. "Never mind looking inside," the rider said. "I'm satisfied it's in there. We will let the Messiah open it. Clearly, the power the crown possesses is meant only for him. It is evident that it is only safe in the hands of the Messiah." As he was carefully placing the box back in the satchel, the one with the scar kept whispering audibly that he had seen a type of light escaping from the partially opened lid, a type of hot light. His imagination, obviously, since nothing was there but a brick. Had it happened in future times, everyone would have understood that the dead man had died of a heart attack, simple heart failure, and the fact that it happened at that particular moment in time had been nothing more than a coincidence. The rider drew forth an Arabian scimitar he had been carrying bare-bladed in his leather waistband, and, after announcing he was the brother of Athronges, eased his horse forward and claimed the money in the box. No more was there a need to open it. He raised his clenched fist skyward in a silent salute, a militant gesture that meant, "O God, who is greater than you?" The horse, unencumbered by the harshness of metal in its mouth, was obedient to the rider's every command, being no more than a nudge of the knees here, a nudge there, a gentle and loyal animal that knew nothing of the deeds it was empowering. The brother of Athronges then threw down an additional weapon. Its steel clanked in the sand. The one with the scar grabbed it up and touched the deadly blade to his disfigured lips in a peculiar type of kiss. It was a sword that looked like a Greek dagger, though longer and thinner, stiletto type, sheathed in a makeshift leather scabbard. Like so many others of provisional armies and counter-revolutionaries, these men had no uniformity, no standard or weaponry or dress, other than the red ribbon that marked them as soldiers of the Messiah and the untrimmed beards that identified them as servants of God. Their weaponry was what they could steal. The ritualistic kiss seemed to take away the fear and replace it with a feeling of strength and power, as if it, too, possessed some type of energy. The misshapen lips took on a sneer as he tied the death instrument onto his back, positioning it so that he could reach it with ease, just an easy swing of the hand, and mounted one of the empty horses. It was effortless, the way he leapt astride the saddled and waiting animal. His duty only partially complete, and in seeing that Mahler was among the living, he edged his mount forward toward his former general, smiling, to let him know that he was going to particularly enjoy this part of his assignment, now that he was the powerful one. For now he had the things that make men powerful: a horse, money, steel that can end a life, and the Messiah as his Lord and Master. And God was with him, as it was with the kings of old. And if God is with you, who can stand against you? So said the smile as he moved toward Mahler. It caused Mahler's muscles to twitch. The deformed smile curved upward, seemed to invite him to try. It was a horrific look, animated by the scar, exposing discolored and misshapen teeth. In his eyes were reflections of the insane lawlessness that pervaded the land, sect against sect, tribe against tribe. Oddly, it had been Herod's iron fist that had kept the warring factions together in peace. Now, not even Roman soldiers could keep order, especially when some of the soldiers themselves were corrupt. "One of the empty horses is for your wife," he said to Mahler. "I am afraid that she must come with us." So sad. Mahler suddenly realized that his wife was no longer by his side. He looked around. There came a scream. "Rachel!" The color crimson flashed into his face as he saw that the brother of Athronges had snatched her up, and that he held her in one enormous hand and the Arabian sword in the other. The horse was backing away, prancing with controlled steps, nervous at the commotion happening upon its back, because Rachel was struggling violently against the man's powerful arm. The brother of Athronges laughed. "The plan worked," he said in the tongue of Aramaic, the common tongue. "It was the only way we could lure the daughter of the famed merchant Eli away from the safety of enclosed walls. I am Josiah, one of the 4 brothers of Athronges." The arm that held Rachel seemed the size of a rain cistern. "Soon," he continued, "soon Athronges will be recognized by us all as the Messiah and be heralded as a ruler more powerful than the Caesars, more powerful than the Macedonian. He will be a king to rule over kings, subjugating even the fierce yellow-skinned warriors of the Far East." He was addressing Eli half standing, half sitting, trying to stand, but shivering so violently he could not find footing. "And you shall help us. You shall help us finance our efforts, old man. You think we would be satisfied with a handful of sesterces? We know what you are worth, and we know how much you love your daughter. Your own life means very little to you. We know that. But your daughter? For your daughter, you would give your entire fortune if that be the price." He glanced at Mahler, as though delivering an insult, then brought his eyes back to Eli. "Answer me, old man. What do you think your daughter is worth? If you were asked to put a price on her." Eli's trembling turned into sobs. "Please, anything. Just give her back, please." 10 talents? Yes, I think that would be an appropriate amount. 10 talents. Just see, that is 216,000 sesterces. Am I correct? Yes, 216,000 sesterces, 10 talents. When the Lord of Athronges has it in his hands, she will be escorted safely back to Caesarea. My personal guarantee. 10 talents? I haven't got that kind of money. I'd have to sell my farms and my ships. Let us know when it is done. Josiah pulled Rachel into him, struggling as she was to free herself from his grip, and bent forward to look directly into her frightened eyes. "In the meantime, I am quite sure your daughter and I can find ways to pass the days and nights." We brought a horse for you, did you notice? Let us spare no comfort for our guest. But for the moment I have given her permission to share mine. Her arms and feet were flailing. The horse was fighting an urge to rear up under the tumult, and was being calmed by the soothing voice of this man called Josiah. The same voice that was tormenting Eli, laughing at him, was also cooing the animal with gentle tones and warm touches on its neck. The animal surely needed the reassurance, surely was already uncomfortable under the added weight of Rachel and of the large satchel of coins and the brick bearing down upon its neck, tied to its rigging. It was Roman rigging. The horse had at one time belonged to a Roman soldier, a particularly commendable souvenir for a warrior of the Messiah, for it was useful as well as commemorative. Some insurgents took scalps or fingers as souvenirs. God frowned upon such practices because it provided nothing of practical value. The one with the scar sat comfortable now on a horse of his own and watched with amusement this drama that was unfolding in front of him. Both his hands were idle in front of him. He was using them to lean forward on his mount. He would have no need for them, nor would he have need of the Roman short sword that was a part of his stolen uniform, or the dagger hanging makeshift on his back. "How will I know where to find you?" stammered Eli, barely able to stand, barely able to speak. "We will find you," said Josiah. Josiah indeed was a Goliath of a man. His neck alone was equal in size to his huge head, leaving one with the thought that God was running short on time and just stuck it there on his shoulders without shaping it. Even given his strength, he was having difficulty holding Rachel, so aggressively was she struggling and screaming. They were screams more of hatred than of fear. She would have spat in his face and torn it to pieces with her bare hands had she the opportunity. The screams amused Josiah, though, and to show his power, he freed the other hand by sliding the sword into his leather waistband, or so he thought. It fell to the ground instead, and violently shook her, then lifted her colobium and ripped off her undergarments, and did to her, by the force of his strength, right there on the horse, right there in front of Mahler and Eli, what no man should do to a woman, what no father should see done to his daughter, what no husband should see done to his wife. Rachel jerked at the pain of the first thrust. The surprise showed in her face. She collapsed into the rest of them. The anger and the hatred in her face changed to show a type of overwhelming defeat, a crush of defeat, because now she had been defiled. Now she was a woman useless. Josiah was half laughing during the foul deed and half succumbing to his passion. He was looking at Eli the entire time with the sudden control he had over this powerful man of wealth and influence. But there was another man he should have been watching, that he had let slip from his sight, a very dangerous man. The husband of the woman he was tarnishing, the man he had erroneously dismissed as a weakling and a coward. Where was he? Josiah realized his mistake and looked around for him. Too late. Mahler had picked up the Arabian sword. He swung it at Josiah's horse, crippling its leg, and brought the same single motion to cripple the horse of the other one, the one with the scar, then impaled him with it as he came tumbling to the ground. The sword caught him twice, first in the abdomen above his hip, the second just under the chest bone. It must have pierced the heart, because life had gone out of him instantly. Both horses were down and struggling to get to their feet. Josiah should have run, but he was furious. He had been humiliated by, of all people, a temple scribe and a coward who had been given a military position of authority purely for political reasons, where he, Josiah, bore the scars of many battles and deserved it far more. He needed recompense. He advanced empty-handed and on foot toward this wretched and pitiable priest who was the lesser man. He would squash him with one bare hand. He laughed as he walked toward Mahler, laughed and mocked him with words like, "A baby shouldn't be walking around with things that are sharp," and "You better give it to me now before you cut yourself." Those were the things Josiah was saying, unaware that his comrade lay dead in the sand at the hand of Mahler, unaware of what was about to happen to him from behind, from a second attacker, one he had not thought of as a hazard, a mere woman, the woman he had defiled. It showed first in his face as surprise, then anger as he whirled to confront whoever, whatever, had given him that huge sting. Rachel had plucked up a broken arrow that lay in the sand, a remnant of some battle of an era gone by, and had plunged it into Josiah's back. The arrowhead was not attached. It was merely a broken shaft, but sharp enough and stout enough to pierce flesh. He was angered to the extreme, and he would have killed her in the next instant had not his next breath been cut short by the edge of his own sword, held now by Mahler, giving so deep of a cut that it nearly decapitated him. Josiah had cut the throats of others many times. Now he knew the horror of it. Rachel knelt on the ground beside him. Compassion was on her face. She reached out to comfort him with both hands on his chest. He gripped one of her forearms. It looked like he was mouthing the words, "Help me." But it was not compassion the dying man saw in Rachel's face. It was something else. Her hands were not there to help. They were there to manipulate, to push and twist, to cause the spurting blood to gush out faster, to pump every last bit of it from his body. The face of this now powerful woman, the woman he had violated, was the last thing the feared bandit Josiah saw before returning home to take stock of how terribly he had handled this going out, and to face the judgment of a God he thought he understood. Eli and Mahler stared in disbelief at Rachel at what she had done, though it was not the deed of what she had done to Josiah that had caused them their alarm. "You didn't scream," said Eli to his daughter. "Why did you not scream?" "Yes," echoed Mahler. Why did you not scream when he was abusing you? It almost looked like you were enjoying it." She was still looking down at Josiah, covered in his blood. She knew what they meant. According to the law given to Moses, if a woman is forced by a man to lie with him, and it is in a public place where others can see and hear, and she does not cry out for help, it is a sin, and she is to be stoned at the city gate. She turned to her husband. "My lord," she said, though not apologetically, not begging, looking forcefully at him, stating her wishes matter-of-factly. "The law says that if the attack occurs in the country where no one is around to see and offer help, then only the man who has committed the offense should die. Clearly, my offender has paid that price. While it is true that we are in a public place within the city, look around you. It is obvious that no one has seen. The people go about their own business. If they did see, they clearly did not care, or they were afraid. No one would have come to my aid, even if I had screamed. Therefore, if you think I have wronged you, my husband, what I ask is this, that you have mercy and give me a quiet divorcement and say nothing to anybody. No one will know." "Except Yahweh," said Mahler, "who knows all." The horses were galloping away with empty saddles. They had been wounded but not completely crippled, and had managed in their terror and bewilderment to scramble upright, carrying with them the ransom money. The heavy jingling and clanking of the bag could be heard among the louder sounds of the hoofbeats, disappearing sounds. Eli looked in the direction of the horses, now almost to the cover of the forest, and mouthed a prayer to Almighty Yahweh, that the money find its way into worthy hands, someone who has need for it, someone who will use it wisely.